two.
Yeah, so two of us get to
But
vote?
why can't they? I mean, they trust the other people. No?
They were here.
Yeah,
They weren't here.
so we have
People
only
always
two.
abstain when they're not.
Yeah,
Right.
but do we have enough to approve them?
You and me.
Yeah,
And they, our legal understands that that's
okay.
all we have.
All right. Okay. Are we ready? Okay. Good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Village of Corrales, meeting of July 15th, 2026, to order. And we are going to call the roll, and then we'll look at the agenda. So please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry Sturmer,
Here.
Mary Chappelle,
Here.
Jody Harrington,
Here.
Edgar Bowles,
Here.
Mike Source,
Here.
Salome Ward.
Here.
We have a quorum.
So we have a quorum, and we would like to look at the draft agenda and ask for approval of the agenda by motion.
I motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion to approve
I'll second.
and seconded. So a motion to approve by Commissioner Harrington and second by Commissioner Shores.
Source.
And please call the roll.
Okay, for the vote, Salome Ward,
Aye.
Mike Source,
Here.
Ed- Edgar Bowles,
Aye.
Jody Harrington,
Aye.
Mary Chappelle,
Aye.
and Jerry Sturmer.
Aye. So we have our agenda, and the next item is to approve the minutes of the meeting of June 17th. And we have the draft minutes before us. Do we have a motion to approve, or is there any concern about the minutes?
I have no concerns.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve the minutes
Uh,
of
we
the
ha-
June 17th meeting.
And do we have a second?
I'll second that motion. to approve
Okay,
minutes.
we have a motion and a second to approve the meeting minutes of June 17th. And please call the roll.
Okay, and we have a unique situation for the minutes. Only the folks that were here present in June can vote. So Mary Chappelle,
Aye.
Jerry Sturmer,
Aye.
and Jody Harrington.
Abstain.
So because Commissioner Harrington was not here and no one else besides the two of us are here, we have a unanimous vote of the two of us, and according to council, this is sufficient because, what did you call it?
Implied.
An implied quorum in this case, the only other option would be to just not vote at all, and in that case, it's implied approval. So it's better, our council said it's better to have some council, or some commissioners who were present to actually vote, even though it's not a full quorum.
Thank you. So those minutes are now approved and in the record. As everybody can see from the draft agenda, we're going to move to the Corraleños Public Forum, and we have no public hearing items today, but happily we do have an opportunity for thorough training with Brennan Williams, and we'll get to that in a minute. Let's begin with the Corraleños Public Forum. We do have one comment in written form here, but I would hope that we could also hear from the commenter. Would you like to come forward? Please. So tell us your name and address.
My name is Pat McLennan, 2968 Corrales Road. I submitted a letter, and I don't think I need to repeat that information. I basically was looking for a revision to our minutes and our recordings. I think particularly tonight in this training session that the recording, the video recording of this meeting should be retained long-term for review. It's a complicated job, and there's things that I think Mr. Williams will be telling us tonight that perhaps we want to look at again. So I would urge that we keep that as a record video copy of this meeting. The other items I think I suggested was just a pre-meeting, and even perhaps Mr. Williams have a comment, since it started actually in the city of Albuquerque, which he's very familiar with. I just thought that this would be beneficial to create a better informed decision. Those were my two comments, and I hope you'll consider them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I will say that tonight's meeting, because there are no items requiring swearing in, the audio will be saved, and I believe that the administrator is going to put it online because it's different than a usual quasi-judicial meeting. So it will be saved.
Great.
And posted.
Okay. Okay. Anything else? Otherwise, we have the opportunity. We'll move on to the next item. Before we do that, I want to welcome all the new commissioners, and I hope those present are familiar with the names of people who have been approved. And I wanted to make sure that we had the names of the current commissioners available for the public. And I've asked that the administrator put this in all subsequent packets so that it's available to everybody and it's clear who are members of the commission. Just for the public members, and I want to welcome the new members, are volunteers from the community who have agreed to participate in the decision-making that comes before the Planning and Zoning Commission at our monthly meetings. And now I get to introduce Brennan Williams, who is going to walk us through some very important points. Both Commissioner Harrington and I had an opportunity to hear you. I think it wasn't more than 20 months ago? Or
It was September last year.
September last year, so it's very clear in my mind, of course. Mr. Williams is a retired planning and zoning professional with more than 25 years of hands-on experience in the Albuquerque metro area, having served in various administrative roles, both for the city of Albuquerque and the Bernalillo County Planning Department. And he retired in 2021, and today helps many communities establish their procedures and make sound, legally defensible land use decisions with complete confidence and clarity. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Commission and members of the public. Thank you. That was quite the setup. I appreciate that. I am happy to be here. I appreciate the invitation. It's good to see folks that I've seen before. I apologize. The corny jokes will remain, so you'll have to laugh all over again at those, if you would, please. But I'm pleased to be here. I am particularly happy on a personal level because July, in my opinion, has always been Commissioner Appreciation Month. 30 years ago, in July of 1996, I attended my very first Planning Commission meeting at the City of Albuquerque. I was a brand new zoning inspector with the City of Albuquerque, and the supervisor that I was training with grabbed myself and 3 of the other new hires and said one morning, "Come on, we're going to go to the Planning Commission meeting." And I was disgusted because I watched 2 members of the public, an applicant and a member from a neighborhood association, act like little kids. They had no common courtesy was out the window. And so one of the applicants was a developer that had to make some changes to their fire lanes, the location of the fire lanes on their shopping center site development plan that they were trying to get through the process. They had been before the commission a couple times. The fire marshal's office was insistent that wherever the current location of those fire lanes were, it needed to be adjusted because they weren't able to turn around their large fire trucks. They didn't want to be backing out, so they had asked the commission to request that the developer make changes. And he had done so, but he was not happy about it. And so he stood before the commission and shook his finger at them and said, I've wasted time and money on this. It's cost me. If I don't get approval today, I'm going to sue every single one of you. The other individual I remember was someone from a neighborhood, president of a neighborhood association, who told the commission, and I quote, "Don't be stupid. Everybody knows we don't need another gas station on the west side of town. Listen to what constituents are telling you, what the members of the public are telling you. Don't approve this." I turned to one of my new hires, one of my brand new buddies, and said, I just can't believe that people would act like this in a public forum. And he said, well, this is no different than the way they treat us at the permit counter or out in the field when we're doing our jobs. And I said, well, that's true, but we get paid. We collect a salary. We get a paycheck every 2 weeks. We've got health benefits. We've got dental plans that we can rely on. The Planning Commission are volunteers that come in to do this. Why should they be subjected to that type of behavior was my point. I can tell you over the past 30 years, working with various commissions at both the city of Albuquerque as well as Bernalillo County, as well as other jurisdictions across the state, unfortunately, it's not uncommon for people that are in the process to behave that way. So let me say, as I begin, thank you for what you do as volunteers for your community. I have found without fail that members of the Planning Commission care deeply about how their community is developed, how decisions are made and that sort of thing. So I appreciate your invitation to be here tonight, as well as that from the members of the public who obviously, again, care about planning and zoning issues. So let's get started. What's it all about? As I mentioned, as an appointed official of the village, you serve a vital, important role in your community. The decisions that you make today will live on for generations, hundreds, maybe hundreds of years. And I am going to take this point and I'm going to beat it over the head today because, again, your role is very important, and doing it, conducting your business the right way is critically important to success. As I mentioned there, how you conduct your business, your meetings, all of that affects how you are perceived in the community. Your level of success and influence is judged by that. The goals for tonight are basically to discuss and consider some common planning and zoning terminology, some topics. We'll talk about how to deal with various planning and zoning issues. I'm going to outline the roles and the responsibilities of various individuals and groups in the planning and zoning process. And then finally, we'll touch on how to avoid unnecessary pitfalls or obstructions that might lead to some sort of liability to you personally or to the village as a whole. Before we get officially started, questions are appreciated. I know I'm standing at a podium and this looks rather formal and stiff. I don't want it to be that way. Please, if you have questions, ask them. They are encouraged. I have found over the years that if you've got a question about a particular issue or I need to explain further, there's somebody else in the room that has the same or similar question. So again, please don't hesitate to ask. I mean this truly. There is no such thing as a stupid question. I am formally declaring that the Vegas rule is in effect, meaning the things we talk about here, I want you to feel free to be able to do that because, again, that's how I find that a majority of the issues can be resolved. And then lastly, keep in mind, while there are certain legal requirements that I'm going to talk about and impress upon you that those are legal requirements, there is not a right way to zone or to regulate land use in your community. The way they do it in Corrales might be similar to, but it's probably different than the way they do it in Carlsbad. Doesn't mean that one community is right or better than another. I like to tell communities that if you find somebody else that does it a little bit better than you do, or you like a certain aspect of how they do things, it's a lot like pop music. Take that idea, repackage it as your own, and then use it. That's A-okay. There's no such thing as plagiarism when we're talking about zoning. And last bullet point there, municipalities can create their own ordinances, their own codes, their own plans, depending upon the unique characteristics and goal of your community. What you can't do is make up rules on the fly. So if something is not working and you want to change those rules, you have to engage in the formal process to do that. But there's nothing that says that you can't change what you've got if you as a commission feel like it's not working correctly. So what is zoning? If you're old school like me, you go over to the bookshelf and you wipe the dust off the dictionary and you go to Z and you look up zoning, and you might find something like this. Zoning is local government law that controls the use of land within the specified jurisdiction. Clear as mud. If you are young and hip and you Google it, or you type it into ChatGPT, you might find something that says zoning is a systemized method of land use regulation designating the activities which may occur thereon. Again, not too educational, or it doesn't explain. The layman's version is this. Zoning is the government's ability to tell you what you can or you cannot do on your own property. I don't know about you, but sometimes hearing that after saying it for years and years and years still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up, because your home is your castle, right? You think of your property as yours. That's very personal to you. I can assure you, as a young zoning inspector in Albuquerque, you weren't fully vetted. You had not paid your dues until you had been called a communist, a terrorist, or a fascist in the performance of your duties. While that may be a common complaint about zoning, when done correctly, that's not what zoning is. Okay? Let's talk about what zoning is. The truth is that land use standards have been in effect for as long as mankind has walked the earth. If you're a hunter, a fisherman, outdoorsman, whatever, think about setting up a campsite. In a nutshell, that is zoning. You figure out the location for your tent, which is going to be your residential, your house for the weekend. You place the cooler at a specific space on the campground. You don't want it too close to the tent, but you also don't want it so far away that it's inconvenient to go grab something out of your food source, out of the cooler. You set up a campfire. You don't, again, want that so close to the tent that it damages the tent, nor do you want it damaging the food source. And then, of course, if you've ever been camping with little kids, the question is, Daddy, where do we go to the bathroom, right? That's done somewhere else, far away from the campfire and the tents and the food source. That's planning. That's community planning in a nutshell. There are really three significant events that happened about 100 years ago that kind of established the foundation of what we consider, what we talk about zoning today. The first was construction of the Equitable Building in Manhattan, in New York City. That occurred over about a 2-year period, 1915, 1916. This was the home of, built specifically for, the Equitable Insurance Company. When completed, this was a 36-story dual-tower office building. Was 555 feet tall, provided over 1.2 million square feet of gross floor area, and the big issue, the big rub, was that when the building was completed, it cast a 7-acre shadow so that there were properties literally across the street from this building that had not seen the sun, direct sunlight, since 1915 or 1916 because of the monstrosity of the Equitable Building. And so it was certainly not the first large building in New York City, nor the last, but the people of New York had had enough. They petitioned their elected officials and they said, these massive buildings, without any control, without any regulation, make us feel crowded. It chokes out the sunlight. It feels oppressive. We're walking down these canyons of buildings, and we don't want that anymore. And so what New York City came up with were requirements for step-back architecture. So if you go a certain number of feet high and continue to want to build up, you have to step your building back. There was a shift to separating office developments from one another. They weren't all in one area. They intentionally separated those types of activities. There were adoption of daylight and air requirements, again, so that people didn't always feel like they were being oppressed by these big buildings. And there were also protections for residential development to protect it from commercial or industrial uses. So that was event number one. Number two occurred a few years later, 1922. The Department of Commerce publishes the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act. This becomes the blueprint for cities, particularly along the East Coast, to come up with framework on how to regulate land use within their communities. There were 9 sections of the document. They outlined how to divide a local jurisdiction up, how to adopt enforcement mechanisms to ensure those standards are met, included things like formal notice and public hearings for certain planning and zoning matters, created height limits and story limits for buildings, yard requirements, we commonly refer to those as setbacks, and there were some density limits that were placed there. That was number 2. Issue number 3 was a United States Supreme Court case decided in 1926. It's the Village of Euclid, Ohio versus the Ambler Realty Company. And this is a lawsuit that centered on whether or not the Village of Euclid, which is still there in Ohio, they're a suburb of Cleveland, whether or not they could establish land use restrictions and adopt a zoning code for the properties that were in their village limits. The background is that in 1922, the village adopted an ordinance through a public hearing process. That ordinance came up with 6 different zones, and they applied those new 6 different zones to all the properties that were within the jurisdiction. One of the property owners was the Ambler Realty Company. They owned 68 acres of land, and they argued that the village, by imposing limitations and restrictions on their 68 acres, they had reduced the value of the land. Their argument was that we have always intended on developing these 68 acres for heavy industrial uses, and by you, the village, imposing these restrictions, you're taking away, land value here, and you're not compensating us for it. And consequently, because of that, you're being unconstitutional in your governmental action. So parties begin suing each other, and it works its way up through the United States Supreme Court. And again, in 1926, the United States Supreme Court decided the following: that despite the argument, the ordinance was not an unreasonable use of the village's police power or their inherent ability to control and regulate what occurs within village limits. Secondly, that the ordinance was not discriminatory, as had been argued, because the court found a rational basis for standards to separate residential, commercial, and industrial uses. And finally, the ordinance was not unconstitutional, or in other words, it was deemed to be constitutional in nature, because the process that was used by the village to establish the standards was adhered to, was recognized by the courts as being correct. The court recognized that the presumption of favor of local governments to create zoning regulations, unless they are clearly arbitrary, unreasonable, have no substantial relation to the public health, safety, morals, or general welfare, is the standard which needs to be met. And the court determined that Euclid, the Village of Euclid, had done that. So those are the 3 events: equitable building, Standard State Zoning Enabling Act, and then this United States Supreme Court case. Here in New Mexico, something very similar happened in 1965. The legislature adopted the Municipal Zoning Act, 321.1. This is legislation that provides for the purpose of promoting health, safety, morals, and general welfare. A county or a municipality is a zoning authority, and as such, they may regulate and restrict within the jurisdiction the following: height, number of stories and size of buildings and other structures, the percentage of a yard that can be occupied, the size of yards, courts, and other open space, the density of the population, and the location and use of building structures and land for trade, industry, recreation, or any other purpose. Essentially, anything that occurs, you can use properly zoning to control and regulate the use of land within the jurisdiction. The act goes on to require that the zoning authority has to adopt a comprehensive plan upon which the zoning should be based. The comp plan is your policy document that talks about, in generalities, characteristics of the community that wish to be protected. We appreciate the rural feel, and so we're going to require large lots and large setback distances to preserve that feeling of openness, things of that nature. The zoning code then gives you specifics or the details on how to meet those policy goals. The act says that the comp plan should be designed to lessen congestion in the streets and the public ways, to secure safety from fire, floodwaters, panic, and other damages, promote health and general welfare, we've heard that before, provide adequate light and air, heard that one before, prevent the overcrowding of land, avoid undue concentration of the population, facilitate adequate provisions for transportation, water, sewage, schools, parks, and other public requirements, and control and abate the unsightly use of buildings or land. Also goes on to say that the zoning authority must provide by ordinance the process by which zoning decisions or zoning determinations are made, the standards that are to be enforced, and the procedures that are used to change, to modify, to supplement, or to repeal or adopt land use requirements. The act also mandates that a properly noticed public hearing must occur when a hearing body is engaged in those activities. The notice must indicate the time and the place where the hearing is to take place. It's got to be provided at least 15 days in advance of the hearing, and depending upon the size of the request or the property that will be affected by the request, you either have to send out certified mail, return receipt requested, or first-class mail. And again, that's all under state statute. As we drill around a little bit further, I hope I'm not surprising anyone here, but the Village of Corrales has a section in your zoning ordinance that talks specifically about the Planning and Zoning Commission. Talks about the number of members, 7. You're appointed by the mayor with consent of the governing body. You're charged to serve staggered terms of 2 years. You have to reside within the village limits. Talks about makeup. You've got to have a chair, a vice chair, and a secretary. Those positions serve for 1 calendar year or until the Planning Commission elects somebody else. You've got duties that are outlined there. I won't read all of those, but you are to hold hearings, public hearings on planning and zoning matters that come before you, offer recommendations to the governing body, and work with them on any necessary public improvements, as well as if you've got ideas on how to finance those. Those all fall under your responsibilities as commissioners. You've got to hold at least 1 regular meeting a month, unless there is no business before the commission. You've got to adopt rules of procedure, and you've got to keep minutes and make sure those are turned over to the village clerk for record-keeping purposes. So in a nutshell, as I mentioned at the beginning, your authority to regulate is guaranteed, is protected, is outlined at the federal, the state, and the local level. I've always liked this quote: with great power comes great responsibility. I was taught that it was some version of a speech given by Winston Churchill. My teenage daughter informed me, no, Dad, that's from Spider-Man 3. So whether it's Churchill or it's Spider-Man 3, I do think it's applicable to the role that you're doing as planning commissioners. You've got a lot of responsibility, but with that comes the cost of making sure you're doing your job correctly every single time, or as close to every single time as possible. Let me stop right there. Questions? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Just to clarify, Brennan, that the municipality has the primary responsibility and authority to govern all those things you've listed, as opposed to the state or the federal government, right?
Correct. Yes, sir. Yes. At the local level, your local ordinance is going to dictate how you do things, but there are protections and allowances and authority given at the federal and the state level.
Yeah, as long as we're staying within the enabling legislation at
Correct.
both of those levels.
Yes, sir. Correct. Good point.
There was in your slide, you talked about the Euclid versus Amber.
Yes, sir.
They argued, that is the Amber Realty, that something was taken away from them. They had already purchased this 68 acres. And so they lost something that they thought they had.
Okay, I would agree with that
But the
summation.
But the court said, for the good of the community, these rules need to go forward.
Correct. And the court also said, having not been on the court, but I'll surmise what the court said in their decision, was that the process that the village used to create the ordinance, so it was a public process, that allowed all property owners, as well as Amber, or including Ambler, to argue, to petition, to raise points as to why they should or shouldn't be subject to the code. And because that process was public, it was open, it was transparent, it met all the notification requirements, that the law, the zoning law, was allowed, that it went through the right process, and that it wasn't unconstitutional at its base, at its nature.
There was a question here in the community in the most recent comprehensive plan where the village was encouraged to consider smaller use of a lot, a smaller percentage, and that seemed to have been in the minds of the state legislators at one point. That's a power that the village would have to have smaller or larger percentage.
That's correct.
Some owners of lots came and testified before this commission that you can't take away what we already own. We own the ability to build this big, and now you're saying that that you might change that to smaller. We purchased in order to build big, and now you're considering taking away our ability to have a big lot or a big house. You see what I'm trying to say?
Yes, I mean,
Seems like
conceptually.
the Supreme Court said, but if done properly, the village could change the percentage, and that homeowner who only purchased a lot, not an already existing building, might not win in court.
Sure, and I am painting, not to be difficult, I am painting with a pretty broad brush, but something of this nature can be argued in several ways, where the village may be told, be careful if you adopt this particular regulation, or if you make this change to the code, it could have a ripple effect. It could lead to properties or buildings that are non-conforming. In other words, they don't meet the current standard. That sometimes is difficult to regulate. But you also may be getting into, depending on the particulars, on the details, you may also be getting into territory where you might be improperly restricting or taking care of somebody's property rights. It's really issue specific, but it's not uncommon to hear folks say, if you're looking to change the code, we don't want to change because we always wanted to, or we've anticipated, or we've dreamed about doing X, Y, or Z. Again, broad brush here, but that doesn't always meet the legal standard for prohibiting a community from changing, adopting, tweaking, updating their regulations.
So we're only gonna, those people he's talking about then threatened to sue us if it was adopted so they couldn't build the house they had planned. But it seems to me the only answer we're gonna get is if it's changed and they sue us and we go to court. The court will have to answer.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And we'll talk about this in detail a little bit more, but the court is gonna be looking at, should it go to court? The court is gonna be looking at the record that was created, and one of the points I'm going to express to you is make sure you create a good, clean record. Doesn't guarantee, anybody can sue anybody for anything. Doesn't mean that, given the circumstances, that the court would necessarily overturn a decision that was made by the commission. But it just helps if the record is clean and the process is followed to a T. It just protects you and it protects the village in those decisions that you make that some people feel might be unfavorable.
And it's actually the village council that would make that change.
Right.
We don't have that.
Correct, yes. I mean, again, I'm assuming in this scenario that you're relying on staff, you're relying on the village attorney or the firm to advise you, and then you listen to the testimony and you look at the evidence and you make the best decision possible. And we'll talk about what those benchmarks are. But yes, you are not, you're not stuck out on a limb somewhere with the fear that somebody's behind you, with a handsaw trying to cut your legs out from underneath you. Okay, anybody else? Okay. So, major point here, if you leave with nothing else in mind, as a hearing body, you have to adhere, you shall adhere to the established rules and those procedures when conducting your business. Let's talk about what those are. It was mentioned, Commissioner Bowles mentioned that the distinction between a federal and state standard, I'm not here to scare you, but it's not uncommon during our legislative sessions for bills to be proposed out of both the House and the Senate that seek to preempt or take away a local community's ability to make decisions on planning and zoning matters. Really, it's one of those situations where if approved or if adopted, certain bills would take away your authority to weigh or to decide certain matters. Those are just a couple that have come up in the past couple legislative sessions. There are more that are out there, and I can tell you there will be more in the future. And again, one of the common complaints that House members or senators will use is that they're hearing complaints from their constituents that the process is broken, that people are not treated fairly and equally, that one decision on a particular matter is made 1 month, and then the next month a very similar request comes forward, and the commission makes a completely different decision. That any level of predictability in the process is gone, and so some of these proposals are meant to take away that authority at the local level and make it a statewide requirement. So again, adhering to the process is important. It really comes down to ethical decision making, and that is crucial to keeping the local community out of legal, procedural, and public problems. You want to make sure as a commission that you're respected, that the work that you do is respected. People may not like the answer or the decision that you give them, but if you're engaged in a fair, open process, that gives people an ability to get involved and try to have their side of the story told. High standards of integrity and proficiency are required so that, again, public respect for the process is maintained. Committing to doing things as written, following the established process, and being open and transparent is the key. The public has a right to be informed. It is a public process, so they have a right to be informed and participate in that process. So key points here. Planning and Zoning Commission shapes the future of the community. I've talked about that a couple times before, right? Don't forget that. Often you are responsible for helping or sometimes hindering dollars, development dollars. Could be in the tens of thousands, could be in the millions, but you have the authority to make a decision that could affect a really big project, a really good project, a really bad project. That's why adhering to the standards and the criteria is important. There should be an emphasis on gaining and holding community trust, always acting with fairness and integrity, helps create that favorable rapport with the public, and having a clean slate approach for matters that come before you is necessary, is required by the law. We'll talk about this a little bit more in just a little bit, but you, as planning and zoning commissioners, sit as judges, very similar to what a judge in a courtroom would do when you hear planning and zoning matters that come before you. And you should act accordingly. I'm not saying that you don't, but it's important to remember that that's the level. That's where we're going to raise the bar to make sure that we act and behave in that capacity. Due process is required. We'll talk about that more at length here in a little bit, but it just ensures fairness and it gives participants an opportunity to be heard, guarantees that they've got an opportunity to be heard. Transparency provides openness and accountability. We are public servants, in whether we work directly for the Planning and Zoning Department or you serve as representatives of the Planning and Zoning Commission, but we are public servants in that aspect. Perception is extremely important. Participants need to feel that they were heard, that the hearing was fair, and that they were treated with respect. Very quickly, let me give you a practical example. This is completely made up. I take no credit. The names have not been changed to protect the innocent because there were no names to begin with. But in my practical example, the San Gabriel Treatment Center LLC proposes to build a new building to house a methadone treatment center, and the code, this fictitious code that we're talking about, requires them to go through a public hearing process in order to get approval before they can turn in their plans and start building their building. Okay? The zoning code classifies the methadone clinic, or the methadone treatment center, as a clinic, and it also defines a pharmacy, an urgent care center, a legal aid operation, a dental clinic, and mental health or counseling services also fall under this umbrella of a clinic. Okay? A couple months ago, for what it's worth, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved a veterinary clinic in the same zone, but on the opposite side of town. So it's not apples to apples necessarily, but they're similar projects, classified similarly, and within the same zoning designation. Large neighborhood opposition comes to the public hearing, and they are opposed, vehemently opposed to the methadone treatment center. They say things like it's too close to the daycare center that's just down the street. Traffic is already a problem in this area. Clientele of methadone treatment centers, there are going to be problems, and there are going to be problems in this neighborhood if the Planning Commission approves this. We don't want those type of people in our neighborhood. And somebody else argues that the building style doesn't reflect the design characteristics of the neighborhood. They're proposing just a square metal building, black and white colors. There's no character, there's no architectural feel to that, so we're opposed to that as well. So remember this hearing body, after hearing from the public and their concerns, one says, you know what, we should implement a moratorium, and we should, during that moratorium period, we should change the definition of clinic to remove methadone centers. Somebody else says, you know what, traffic is a problem with that intersection. I think it would be a good idea that we require the developer to come up with a traffic study. Somebody else suggests that the applicant meet with the police department to come up with a public safety plan because you know there's going to be problems based on this land use, and we want to make sure the police are working with the operator so that we know how we're going to deal with these people when they start causing problems. And finally, somebody says, I understand the architectural concerns, and I think we should have the developer hold 3 or 4 different public charrettes, meetings where the members can come in and we can ask the director to change it to make it fit with the neighborhood. Anybody see problems with any of that?
All of it.
All of it. Please, explain.
Well, if each of those areas of concern isn't specifically addressed in the zoning code, then there's no authority to require any of that to happen.
Everybody go like this. Thank you. That was exactly my point. Is that you want to be careful. We're engaged in a public hearing. We're listening to and it's not always opposition, but we're listening to feedback from the public, it has to be feedback that's pertinent to the established standards. If the code doesn't require a traffic study, theoretically, I guess you could ask the developer to put together a traffic study, but you wouldn't use that as basis to deny the request. We asked them to put together a traffic study and they didn't do it. Well, the code doesn't require it. So you've got to play by the existing rules. Okay? Questions about that? As decision makers, these are questions I think you need to be asking yourself consistently. What are the standards? What are the rules for review? What are our parameters? Where are the bumpers set up? How far can we go? What can we ask for? What can we not ask for? What are the necessary steps as established? And are we following those steps in the process? Don't skip a step. You have to follow the steps. If they're established, you have to follow those steps. And as a decision maker, have I been open, honest, and transparent in my involvement in that matter? Again, it comes back to personal ethics. You want to make sure that you're above board as you're making these decisions and determinations. Very quickly, some legal considerations for you as commissioners. These affect you. You're not necessarily responsible for them per se, but I do want to make sure you're aware of these. The Open Meetings Act, it's a state act that requires public notice and openness during decisions and planning and zoning deliberations. So if you've got a request that comes before you, you have to adhere to the standards of OMA, the Open Meetings Act. The Inspection of Public Records Act also affects you. That act indicates that while you conduct your business, the notes that you make, the conversations that you have, the emails that you send, all become part of the record, and the public has a right to look at those should they choose to want copies of those or listen to the recordings or whatever. And the village has to provide those for folks that make those requests. The New Mexico Civil Rights Act, it's very similar to protections that we'll talk about in just a second at the federal level, but it makes sure that people, again, are treated fairly. They are not discriminated against as they engage in public planning and zoning hearings and processes. It does allow, should a court find that a commission has violated the New Mexico Civil Rights Act, it does allow for municipal officials, which include planning commissioners, to be held, to be sued, to be held accountable. So again, not that anybody that I'm aware of would intentionally do something like that, but you want to make sure, again, that everybody's getting a fair shake, everybody's being treated the same. Finally, the Human Rights Act, again, also just ensures that people are not discriminated against and that they're treated fairly throughout the process. The Subdivision Act, the State Subdivision Act may affect your decisions. The State Engineer and Water Law may affect some of that. Cultural Properties Act may have some bearing on what you're doing. Again, you're going to be relying on staff or the attorney to help you should a request come before you that would be affected by that. But again, it's important to remember that you're not making the decision in a silo. You've got other standards that you have to make sure are adhered to. The federal level, we'll talk about this more in just a second, but due process under the 14th and the 5th Amendments. Again, it just protects people's rights as individuals and property owners through the process. It requires fairness of all concerning how the resulting decision is made, and it avoids depriving the property of all economically viable uses. May include such things as the Fair Housing Act, the Americans with Disability Act, or the Religious Land Use Institutionalized Persons Act, or LUPA. May affect certain decisions, but again, you would rely on staff to help you understand should one of those, should a request come up that's affected by one of these federal protections. In being ethical, it's important to remember the following. These are kind of things that have always worked for me in my career. Don't forget, zoning standards apply to all properties within the municipal limits. We've got a few empty seats here tonight. It does not mean that because those seats are empty, people don't care. There's an expectation that you as a commission will conduct your business, whether I'm in the room or not, or members of the community are in the room or not. And so it's important to remember that just because you've got a packed house Doesn't mean that you run the meeting any differently when you've just got one or two that are sitting in the audience. There should be some consistency and some predictability to your process. Familiarity with relevant state, local laws, development codes, and planning ordinances is required. You don't have to be a subject matter expert, but having a working knowledge of your code or of your subdivision ordinance, make sure you've got that. Make sure you're reading that and you're understanding it. If you've got questions, you're asking for clarification. The result of the decision that's made may not be popular, but decision makers have to play by the rules. I like to say sometimes that the decisions that you make, it's not a popularity contest. I've got more people voting for me for homecoming king than somebody else. That's not a planning and zoning meeting. Again, we'll get into it in more detail, but you're acting as judges and you have to listen, be unbiased, and listen to the evidence that's presented in order to make a decision. If you adhere to the criteria, more than likely you and your community are going to stay out of trouble. And we'll talk about avoiding conflicts of interest and disclosing, when is it necessary to disclose any personal or financial interests which may create a conflict. Questions? Okay, yes sir, go ahead.
About the, I'll just call it a feedback loop between this commission and the governing body.
Yes.
So when it seems that proposals are coming before us and they are, let's say, they are not specifically, aspects of them are not specifically prohibited in our zoning code, then, and we end up approving projects that displease, let's say, a large number of people in the public. Can you just comment, I don't want you to go deep on this, but say something about if and when it's appropriate for this commission to communicate to the governing body that such and such issue seems inadequately addressed in the code?
Excellent question. And I would just very briefly say that I think the idea or the concept is to have an appointed body and a governing body that are working together and they're on the same page, things of that nature. But it's not uncommon sometimes for there to be maybe a disconnect or, my words, maybe a lack of appreciation at the governing body level. The Planning and Zoning Commission spent 4 hours talking about, building height or solar protection or whatever it might be, and it seems that once it got to the governing body that was an afterthought or that wasn't appreciated as much. That happens. I would advise, or my suggestion would be that if a commission feels like a governing body is not listening, or vice versa, the governing body is concerned about what goes on at the Planning and Zoning Commission level, one of the great ways to do that is when you render a decision, you're outlining in writing why you made the decision, what aspects or what characteristics were considered. What weren't considered is also appropriate. Just, again, explaining how you went from point A to point decision is advisable. And I get it, groups can be very dynamic and some groups get along better than others, but it doesn't mean that you don't put in the effort and the time to come up with a good decision, a good notice of decision that explains what the commission was moved by and maybe what didn't hold quite as much weight.
Thank you.
There was a question in the audience.
Yes, sir.
Yes, question comes to my mind about a concern that an applicant for a change in the use of their property, there may be a history of actions that cause neighbors of that applicant to have misgivings or reservations. Sure. And they are friends to one commissioner. They know that commissioner. They're old friends. They've talked before. And they feel that they know something that would have a bearing or might have a bearing on that situation. The preferred method, of course, is for that person to show up in due process and present their findings in an open forum. But does it mean that when there's outreach from the neighborhood to a commissioner they are supposed to say, no, I will not hear that comment. You must give your comment through the formal process that is the structure of the due process.
And the short answer would be yes. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I'll give some specifics on that. But yes, theoretically, all discovery, all discussion, the presenting of evidence, the reviewing of documents and materials and site plans and elevations, whatever, but the culmination of all of that should occur in public at a public hearing. There's a legal issue that's created if you've got individuals that are communicating with the decision makers outside the public hearing. And I'll cover that in just a little bit.
Could I just throw something up?
Yes, sir.
What about texting during a public meeting or emails? Say a person is emailing a counselor or a planning and zoning commission and trying to influence them at the meeting. Now, is that legal?
No,
Does
would be the
that
short
come down
answer.
to ex parte communication?
Correct, yes. It would fall under ex parte, which we'll talk about. That's the
Okay.
legal issues that I was mentioning. And again, just being quite candid, from my experience, it's also rude. If you're a decision maker and you keep checking your phone, and whether it's, you're surfing eBay or you're trying to arrange your
Yes.
Jamaican vacation, or you're getting communication and influence, or information rather, from someone that's not in the room, or even if they are in the room, they're not standing at the podium and speaking into the microphone.
Correct.
It creates a legal issue, but it's just not, we're not treating people fairly in that scenario.
Right. So how do you handle something like that?
You walk up behind the offending commissioner and, I mean, you do it professionally. I mean, I'm just using you all as an example
Yeah.
here, but if Commissioner Bowles, who has always been problematic, if he continues to send emails or answer emails and get information from folks that aren't at the meeting on his laptop, then I would approach the chairman and I would say, can we have a conversation with him and remind him that, if he could be focused on the speaker or the presentation or whatever the issue is that he's kind of neglecting. Maybe the city attorney, the village attorney might be able to help in that scenario. But you want to, again, encourage and reward good behavior and call out and as quickly as possible do away with bad or rude behavior, would be my suggestion. Yes, sir.
So a kind of an in-between situation, if I'm a commissioner and there's someone that's interested in what we're discussing at the moment, and that individual texts me because they're unavailable, would it be fair to me as commissioner just to say to the whole group, I received this communication from so-and-so, here's the input, et cetera, or should I just ignore it? I mean, if it's someone that wants to be there, that can't be there, but has some input,
Sure.
or should they just do it ahead of time and then not do it during the meeting?
Right, and that would be my advice. I mean, I get it, the world is an unpredictable place, but if I can't be here in person, or I can't participate via Zoom or call in or do something of that nature, I mean, I guess technically you could receive that correspondence and then read it into the record or make it part of the discussion. To me, it's just, it feels a little wonky and you're almost violating kind of the intent of that. But it does, again, my words, if it's important enough for me to want my opinion to be considered as part of the entire process, then I need to make sure that I'm in the room, or that I've provided written comment during the comment period, or that I hire somebody to come in and speak on my behalf. It just, again, it kind of looks and smells a little bit wonky, and so I would just try and stay away from that as much as possible.
Actually, I recently looked at a SCAFCA meeting, and what they required were all cell phones to be shut off prior to the meeting?
Sure, sure. And as a commission, I'm just throwing this out there, but
Yeah.
if you felt that that standard was warranted, you could certainly adopt that as part of your rules of procedure and prohibit cell phones, laptops, things of that nature. Yes, sir.
Following up on Commissioner Bowles, there has been occasion when we have heard from the community a problem that can only be handled by an alteration of a village ordinance.
Okay.
So what we've tried to do is both put it in, we'll listen to the member of the community at the Coraleño Forum. So it might not have been associated with an application. It was Coraleño Forum, but something that the village council needs to deal with. And so sometimes we've taken a vote and said, we'd like you to consider this or consider that. A lot of times we ask staff to look into it further and to engage with the administration. So there's all a variety of ways of doing this, but I think what I heard from the commissioner is, you know, when we hear an application that the ordinances are not clear about, shouldn't we, you know, take it upon ourselves to alert the council, the village administration?
Yes, I mean, just as a matter of government efficiency, I think that's important. And that can be accomplished in any number of ways, whether it's a written decision where you write that out and you clearly, or somebody writes it out on your behalf. But the decision that's made, the concerns that are raised at the Planning and Zoning Commission are clearly outlined within the notice of decision. You can rely on staff to do that. You know, again, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but depending on what the issue is, it might be appropriate for members of the commission to reach out directly to the elected officials. If it's legislative in nature, if it's an ordinance change that needs to take place, not specific to a case or a particular piece of property, but if it's something the village wants to adopt short-term rental regulations that, you know, community members have expressed concerns about that, or they're in support of that, and there's nothing on the books that would allow for that, certainly it would be appropriate for the commission to reach out to the elected officials and say, hey, you know, we've heard complaints, or we have ideas, or we've got issues on this. Can we create an ordinance, or can we perform a study that would work on something of that nature? That's good government. Yes, ma'am.
So my concern with part of what you said in the beginning there and some comments I've heard earlier is my understanding was that if we came across something that we thought the council should address, that it would be the commission as a whole that would send that to the council, not each individual commission member saying, hey, I have this issue that I want you to address because I'm on the Planning and Zoning Commission. It doesn't seem to me to be appropriate for individual people to be doing that.
Understood, and I apologize for any confusion. Yes, I would agree that if the commission, the membership of the commission has an issue that, you know, a letter signed by the chair or signed by all the commissioners, or whatever form that communication takes place, is most appropriate. However, there is some, and again, I apologize because I feel like I'm getting too far down in the details on this, but there is some allowance without any sort of impropriety, where if you bump into the mayor at the coffee shop and you want to make sure he got the email or the letter about the short-term rental ordinance, that doesn't violate the law. And again, it's issue specific, but in that scenario, there's nothing wrong with a commissioner or a couple commissioners saying, hey, Mr. Mayor, just want to make sure you're aware of this. Or attending the governing body hearing as a member of the community and just expressing, in my role as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, we've heard that there are issues with this and want to make sure that the governing body is aware of that.
See, and I get concerned because then if you say, well, they're individually going to the council, say, and if they're supposedly representing opinion of all of us, we should know what that is.
Absolutely.
And I don't think, there are questions about if being on the commission takes away some of your individual rights, but I think they would need to make it clear that they're there as a member of the community and not from the commission, unless we have all said we want you to go represent us.
Yes, ma'am. I am in complete agreement with you.
Okay.
The distinction or the difference that I'm making is from a legal standpoint, there may be a possibility that if you informally bump into the mayor and want to talk about that it doesn't violate any legal standard. However, from an operational perspective, I think it's much cleaner and easier and guarantees that you stay out of any sort of possible problem if you act as a unified body when it comes to
Right.
a situation like that. So,
Because my practical concern about, oh, hey, Mayor, did you get our email, is generally conversations don't end there. The mayor doesn't say, oh, yes, he may say, oh, I know, no, what did it say? I guess I missed that. And
Right.
then you lead into a whole,
and you're getting dangerously
yeah,
close
and
to
so
the
I
edge of
just
that
think it's
envelope.
better not to do that at all.
And I would agree, and I apologize. The only distinction I was trying to make, that from a legal standpoint, it might be that it doesn't create a problem, but from an operational, how are we going to do this in practice? I would just, again, if the need comes or the issue is such that it requires some sort of formal notification or some sort of formal communication with the governing body, that's done as a unified front, rather than one commissioner goes and another commissioner goes, and that gets messy, and it also creates a perception problem sometimes too. It may be completely legal, but it may look to the public like something's going, deals are being made, backroom deals are being made, or things are being discussed that, I'm suspicious of.
Right. It's the appearance.
The appearance, yes ma'am, very important. Okay, did I run out of juice? I'll do it.
Can we click it?
If you would, please, I think my clicker died. Nope, maybe it came back.
Oh, I did that.
All right, thank you. So, all good questions, thank you for those. Just some tips, make sure we talk about avoiding, or navigating rather, ethical dilemmas. So, some pretty obvious examples here. Everybody knows that accepting gifts or favors in order to vote a certain way is not something a planning commissioner should engage in. Voting on matters that will provide individual financial gain or benefit is something you should stay away from. Discussions of project details outside the scheduled public hearing creates an ethical issue. Don't engage in that behavior. If you've got a personal relationship with an applicant, an agent, a member of a participating party, that in and of itself is not a problem, but you certainly should be open and honest to say, while I don't like my brother-in-law, he is the applicant on this particular case, and I'm going to go ahead and recuse myself because I don't want there to be any appearance of impropriety. Always take the high road on situations like that. But those are pretty easy, right?
Is yours working?
Mine's working.
Oh, good.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. I think you just went to sleep there for a second. Sorry about that.
Okay.
How about some not so obvious ethical issues? How about advising a community member on how they should prepare their application? You're at Walgreens on a Saturday morning and somebody says, aren't you the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission? You do a great job. Hey, listen, I'm thinking about asking for a variance. I want to build an addition onto the back of my house. What do I need to say? What should I fill out on my application so that I make sure that I get approval? Because you know the stuff like the back of your hand, right? Do you engage in that conversation? No. Answering phone calls, emails, or text messages with questions from a community member about a particular piece of property. I see that 5 acres there at the corner of Corrales Road and Applewood is going up for sale. Commissioner, do you know what the zoning designation is for that, and could I put a bed and breakfast in there? That could create a problem. Stay away from that. This is a big one, conducting site visits in order to get a feel for the property. I wanna listen to how much traffic affects this particular location. Or I wanna see how many trees are on the property, or I wanna touch the dirt. I'm just one of those people that likes to feel it with my hands, so I'm gonna take a trip out to the property. That creates an ethical dilemma, that creates a problem. We'll talk about that more in just a second.
Can I answer a question about that?
Sure.
Suppose in a public forum, all the commissioners said, we need to get a better understanding of what the applicant's requesting. Therefore, we as a whole, all seven of us, are gonna do a field trip to that site and look to see what's going on. Is that acceptable? So an individual commissioner should stay away from it, but as a whole, the commissioners agree that that's good feedback in order for them to make a good decision, that they can do that.
That's correct. And the distinction, very good question. The distinction is an individual commissioner or a couple of commissioners taking it upon themselves to conduct that site visit versus the group deciding, and you have to invite the public, to attend a site visit. It may come up that a site visit is deemed necessary. But again, this is not something where you as a commissioner would go out and do an independent investigation to try and gain some facts. Because as we'll talk about in just a minute, that constitutes ex parte communication, which you can't be doing as it relates to the matters that come before you.
Can I make a quick comment on that?
Sure.
Because in a case like that, if all of the commissioners were going to do a site visit, I would have to do the public notice. Okay. I would have to do a public notice. In fact, there was something recently where it was understood that probably a lot of counselors were going to attend, and the clerk's office put up possible quorum. Just to let the public know that a bunch of counselors were going to be in one place at one time. And it would say, and in the other instance, in this instance, I don't think I could say that there might not be, or that there's not going to be discussions made, but or decisions made. There shouldn't be any decisions made on the fly. So it's kind of treading dangerously a little bit.
Right. Again, it's very similar to the communication issue that came up earlier. It's possible there are ways to do it. I am aware of one community, there may be more, but I'm aware of one community in New Mexico that schedules a site visit, and they literally take a school bus and they put all the commissioners on that bus, and any members of the public that wish to participate. They have very specific rules that they're not to talk about the case during the site visit portion, but they drive to property A and then to property B and then to property C. But that is not typical of the way site visits, should they be deemed necessary, site visits should occur. Yes, sir.
So if I'm a commissioner, and my neighbor is going in front of the commission for some issue, I should recuse myself, most of the time.
In that scenario, I think, generally speaking, again, painting with a broad brush here, but I think that would be appropriate. But if you have a situation where, this comes up sometimes, where you as a commissioner are familiar with a subject property that's on the agenda because you drive by it every day when you take the kids to school or go to work or whatever.
That's going to be my next question.
That is okay. The problem is created when an individual decision maker makes a singular, purposeful trip to the site. If you drive by it and you're familiar with it, or you've lived in the community for 53 years and you know it used to be the old garage and then it was a saloon for a while, and I know that property very well, that's different than going out and, again, conducting an independent investigation. Okay. Good questions. So, my scenario here, I'm not getting the look, I'm not getting the confused look on your faces, but I'm not telling you, I am telling you as a commission member, I'm not telling you you can't talk to the community, you just have to be careful about when you do it and how you do it. We'll talk about this a little bit more in just a second, But again, you're acting as a judge, and you have to be judge-like. So I get a speeding ticket. Is it okay for me to go knock on the judge's door or to call him up in his chambers and want to talk to him about my speeding ticket and how the officer erred when he wrote me a ticket for doing 65 and a 45? No, the judge would never talk to me, right? The same concept needs to apply to planning and zoning matters that come before this commission. So what do? Well, you rely on staff, and whether that's a staff of one or that's an A team of 5 or more, you rely on staff and or the administration to assist you. You get questions, you get emails, you get phone calls. Refer those, pass those along. Give those to Lori. Give folks the phone number for planning and zoning, or direct them to the website. But you want to make sure that your involvement in those situations is limited, and that you're, again, essentially keeping your hands clean by passing that along to staff. That's their job. Very quickly, it's important to know what staff does. I can tell you that before a meeting, staff is consulting with applicants. Rarely, if ever, does an application come in that staff has no idea that somebody was going to file. Usually there's phone calls, there's inquiries, there's emails. Sometimes it's the result of a code enforcement action, but staff typically has a pretty good idea of who's getting ready to or who's submitting an application to come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. They're engaged in public outreach. Advertisements are sent to the newspaper, legal ads, mail-outs, staff's making sure those are done correctly. Providing one or more signs for an applicant to post on the property, creating a staff report of some form. Based on the criteria in the code, they may be giving you a recommendation, it appears, based on review, that this proposal meets the applicable criteria of the zoning code and the planning department is recommending approval, maybe something like that. That all occurs before the hearing. During the hearing, they're making sure that the sign-up sheets are kept. That's part of the Inspection of Public Records Act requirements and the Open Meeting Act requirements. That minutes are being kept, accurate minutes are being kept. And they're also working on the notice of decision. I'm not exactly sure how you all do it here. It could be something that's prepared by staff. You may be a decision based on recommendations that you find in your staff report. But again, staff is making sure after a decision is made that the mail out, that the notice is sent out in accordance with law. And then after the meeting, it's certainly possible and plausible for reports or updates of some sort to be given to the administration. Staff also works, just because people get a decision at the Planning and Zoning Commission, doesn't mean that the project automatically continues to move forward. So staff works to advise, to consult with property owners, maybe something associated with plan review, or somebody may want to file an appeal of a decision that's made at the Planning and Zoning Commission. So again, staff is continuing to work with participants after the public hearing. It's really a two-way street. Commissioners can expect from staff advocacy for good planning. The American Planning Association has a set of ethics, and they require planners to act in accordance, to advocate rather for good planning. And so you can expect that from staff. Things like tonight, training on process, procedures, legal requirements, terminology. You can expect that out of your staff. Report the facts of the case related to the code, identify the connection or the relationship between the comp plan and the code and maybe the subdivision ordinance, things of that nature. And then a commission should be able to get and expect to get from their staff jargon-free, easy to use, easy to read staff reports. We as staff, so to speak, want to make your job as easy as possible. There's still quite a lot of brain power, quite a lot of work that goes into it, but we want to make sure that any communications that we are preparing for you, which are public communications, so the public also gets to look at those, make sense, and they're easy to use and they're easy to read. What can staff expect from commissioners? Before you get to the hearing, please review your materials. I have dealt with some commissioners that expected that staff gets to the podium here to tell me everything I need to know. when all of the pertinent details are usually included within that staff report. So be familiar with that. If you've got a question, you're going to ask that, please. If you've got concerns about something, it's appropriate, we'll talk about the parameters, to give some forewarning or to ask, what is the acreage of the property? Is it 80 acres or is it 8.0 acres? Things of that nature would be appropriate. Don't blindside staff. If you've got issues, again, that are not pertinent to the cases that are being heard, that's a conversation for outside the public hearing. And then just showing respect for your staff. So key points here. Discuss any potential conflicts of interest promptly and clearly. Recusing yourself from voting on a matter you have a real or a perceived conflict of interest is appropriate. It's required. It's expected. It is not a bad thing to have to recuse yourself. I have seen some commissioners that struggle because, again, they were related to an applicant, say, but they didn't want to say anything because they didn't want it to make it look like they had done something wrong. It's not a bad thing to recuse yourself. It really helps demonstrate what we've been talking about. Openness, transparency, honesty, ethical behavior. If you, even if it's a perceived or a possible perceived conflict, identifying that, calling it out, saying, I want to make sure for the record that it shows that the applicant is my brother-in-law. I feel like I could make an unbiased decision, but from a perception standpoint, I understand how people could be confused, so I'm going to recuse myself.
Okay, so Brendan, question.
Yes, sir.
Suppose a commissioner lives within the legally required radius of a property that's being brought before the commission for review. Is that an automatic recusal for that commissioner?
You guys you got good questions. I can't tell you. I don't think so, and I'll tell you kind of where I'm coming from. Is I would certainly make sure the record, I would say something or read something into the record, but then it becomes a personal decision. You're going to recuse, or you're letting other members, participants, whether on the commission or in the audience, know that you live within 300 feet of the subject site. And then you make a decision, a personal decision. And being in close proximity to that site, does that somehow influence or bias your ability to listen to the proposal as it comes forward? It might. It also might not. I mean, I've got people that live near me that probably need to go knock on their door and meet them. I don't know them. That they've lived in the neighborhood for a couple of years, and I see them come in and out every once in a while. A situation like that, I feel like if I was a decision maker, I could make an unbiased decision. Conversely, there's people that live in the neighborhood that I think are great, and if that were the situation, an applicant were to come forward that was somebody I knew or I knew very well, I would probably choose to recuse myself. But again, it's an individual decision in a scenario like that.
That's good, thank you.
And then the last sub-point there, just remember, it's always better if you're the one to mention a conflict or a perceived conflict than to have somebody call you out on it after you've voted or after you've already started to engage in the public hearing process of that. So again, just being honest and open. Very recently, the legislature adopted House Bill 298, and it specifies that when a hearing body member has a conflict of interest, by state statute, they're required to do the following. They have to state the conflict on the record, so what's the issue or the perceived issue, and then secondly, they have to leave the room until the matter is decided and the hearing body has moved on to the next matter. Standing at the back of the room, I've seen this before, and engaging in nonverbal communication, is not allowed. Or sitting in the front row and glaring at your fellow commissioners, you guys better approve this. My mother-in-law needs this. That is not appropriate. It wasn't appropriate to begin with, but this bill goes on to specify that should a decision maker, whether it's at this level or at the governing body level, if you've got a conflict, you've got to declare it and you've got to leave the room.
What if you don't think you can make an unbiased decision as an individual?
If you don't think you can make an unbiased decision, then
Because
you
you
would
have
need to recuse yourself.
Whatever sort of inclination against or for a
Correct.
proposal.
Correct. I personally, I could not vote for anybody that was a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. It was just something, I'm joking. But yes, if you had an issue that you convinced yourself, or maybe a fellow commissioner reminded you that you had bias, or you had a pre-existing opinion, yes, by all means, again, this is for the long haul, right? We want decisions that are made that are legally sound, compliant with the criteria. We don't want a situation where a decision is made in haste, or a decision is made improperly or incorrectly, only to have a court overturn that, because that doesn't do anybody any good. Yes, sir.
On the leave the room law?
Yes.
You said that was recent?
Yes, I think it was adopted, oh gosh, what dates are we? I believe it was adopted last, not the most recent legislative session, but before that, but it went into effect recently. I don't think it was July 1, I think it was at the end of the calendar year last year.
So I'm sort of thinking, just as a reminder, we might put that in our rules of procedure.
I would agree with that and advise that and be fully in support of that.
Oh, thank you.
It just, again, if you've got it in writing, it just helps
Just
folk,
reminds us.
helps you remember, and then if there's ever a question, theoretically, it's there in black and white. Yes, ma'am.
So basically, something that keeps on just coming to my mind is we're a small community. So at what level, I run into the same people constantly. Is it just okay if if you're just like, I don't want to hear anything, I'm leaving, I'm not going to talk to you if you're going to discuss a project, or don't tell me if you're going to come before P&Z, or at what point, because the more active you are in the community, the more people you're going to cross paths with. So I just see that being really difficult in a place like Corrales. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I would agree with you.
Okay.
It's not
All
that
right.
it doesn't happen in larger communities, but yes, it's very common for me to hear, and I understand that.
Yeah.
If you grew up here, or you live here, and you've laid down roots, and you've got a large social circle and things of that nature, which are all benefits to the community. But there gets to be a point where individually, you need to be able to say, guys, I can't talk about this right now. Can we change the conversation to the Real Housewives of Miami, or whatever would be more appropriate than talking about my plans to subdivide my 10 acres, and I'm going to create lots, and I'm going to start building houses. And do you think, we're just here at a cocktail party, but can you just give me some off-the-cuff advice? You're bleeding over into dangerous territory.
Yeah, no, and I get that, but I guess what my concern would be is we talk about the perception, so then I wouldn't want someone else being like, oh my gosh, I know you know that person. So I think we need to be trusted to show our good judgment, and we need to, okay.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And again, I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but we may be good friends. And if I come before this body, I probably, as your friend, would want to tell or make a good argument for why my project should be approved, because I want to be treated fairly. But if you feel at a personal level that it either would be a conflict, or could be perceived as a conflict, then you have an obligation to call it out. And if you feel the need to recuse yourself, state why and leave the room. But there could be a situation where we know each other, but our relationship, or the circles that we ran in, or the Little League team that we coached together, doesn't affect your ability to make a judgment about a land use matter. But again, it all comes down to what you're comfortable with, too. As decision makers, you need to base your decision on the facts and the evidence presented, not on personal preference, on bias, or individuals that are involved. None of those things matter. Name, age, race, religion, how long I've lived in the community, things of that nature. All discussions, deliberations, and resulting decisions have to be properly documented and must be accessible to the public. And if you have questions, when in doubt, it's almost always appropriate to reach out to staff, to your attorney, to get clarification, particularly when it's related to process and not the details of a particular request. Pause one more time for questions. All right. So matters that come before the hearing body fall into one of two categories. They're either legislative in nature or they're quasi-judicial. And we're going to focus on quasi-judicial matter. The distinction or the difference between the two depends upon the subject matter of the proceedings. Quasi-judicial matters, while they do pertain to or affect or go before a governing body, the meat and potatoes of what you do as planning and zoning commissioners is quasi-judicial in nature. And this is when the commission is charged with rendering a decision on the rights of a specific individual or a small group of affected people or a specific piece of property based on the criteria that's outlined in the code. And you have to base that decision on the evidence that's within the record. Again, you're acting as a judge. I'm dating myself here, but when I was a kid, I wanted to grow up and be Judge Wapner. I loved the People's Court. I would come home every day after school and turn on the People's Court. And if you'll think about the People's Court or other judicial shows like that, you have a judge that's sitting behind the dais or the desk, and you've got typically two parties. And the judge starts with the first party, and the judge says, tell me your side of the story, and gives that individual an opportunity to tell what happened. And that may include diagrams, and that may include pictures or recordings of some sort. And then after the judge listens to the first party, they turn to the second party and they say, okay, you tell me your side of the story. And they do the same thing, right? Then the judge collects all the evidence, and what's the next thing they do? They take a commercial break because they got to pay the bills. They recess to the chambers and they look over all of the evidence that's presented, and they think about the testimony and the credibility or the lack thereof of people that participated in that process, and then they render a decision based on the law. That's exactly what you guys are doing in your capacity as planning and zoning commissioners. In order to do that, you have to afford participants these three things: due process, the opportunity to be heard, and a written decision based on the evidence in the record that provides findings which demonstrate how the applicant met or did not meet the applicable criteria. Let's talk about those. Due process comes in two forms: procedural and substantive. Procedural due process is guaranteed by the 14th and the 5th Amendments of the United States Constitution. We've also got mirroring standards in state requirements. But in a nutshell, it ensures that the fairness of government actions that might deprive someone of their property, their life, their liberty, or their property are undertaken. People are protected from that type of government action. And what it requires is notice, an opportunity to be heard, and a neutral decision-making body. That's why if you need to recuse yourself because you might be biased in some way, you want to make sure that the decision-making body is neutral. Secondly, substantive due process talks about those same protections from state and federal authority. Give me just a second.
I'm so sorry.
You're okay.
Sorry, fire chief is on.
You're good. Again, protects people's fundamental rights, ensuring that there's a compelling government interest associated with the determination that's being made. And really the focus in substantive due process is on the result of the hearing. These questions are typical from a court. Was the decision that was reached arbitrary or capricious? Fancy words to say, was it a reasonable decision? Does it make sense based upon the evidence and the criteria? Secondly, was it based on substantial evidence in the record? A determination to deny something because traffic is an issue without any sort of scientific traffic study of that nature. That is not evidence, substantial evidence that's in the record, so that could create a problem. Don't just wing it, right? Finally, was the result otherwise in accordance with the law? Those are considerations that a court makes to ensure or to test if due process has been provided. Next, opportunity to be heard. All witnesses that come before you, anybody that's going to testify, including staff, has to be sworn in, is required to be sworn in. You don't go to zoning jail if you don't tell the truth when you stand at the podium here. There's no such thing as perjury from a zoning standpoint. However, it is a reminder to participants that this is a formal proceeding. They are to be on their best behavior. They're to put their good foot forward, that sort of thing. They're to participate professionally and ethically. If necessary, time periods can be established for testimony or presentations. That's very common. You may do that already. It may be in the rules of procedure, but an applicant will have 10 minutes to explain their proposal. Individuals in support of that will have 2 minutes to talk about that. Then we'll jump over to anyone that's in opposition. We'll give them a certain time period. It's okay to limit time periods. Sometimes you'll hear 2 minutes isn't enough. Don't forget, there are other methods of communicating with the commission. You can send your emails, provide written comments to staff, things of that nature. Opportunity to be heard also includes providing for an opportunity for cross-examination of witnesses. It really just gives each party the ability to question motivation or bias or things of that nature, should that be offered. This is not a Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth kind of situation. I've seen various commissions that will either offer a cross-examination time period once testimony has been provided, once we get to that point in the hearing, and the chair will say, all questions need to be submitted in writing, and then the chair will read the commission. It kind of helps to take, should it be a controversial matter, kind of takes some of the sting out of, what do you mean you didn't do a traffic study, or how much did you pay your traffic engineer? And it just helps to keep things a little bit calmer and more professional. But witnesses during cross-examination should never be subject to badgering or anything of that nature. They should be treated with respect. Finally, the written decision. So all evidence that's presented has to be reflected within the decision. And it's A-okay to give different weight and different influence to different evidence. Things like scientific reports, professional studies, or testimony by a subject matter expert typically warrant significance because they're grounded in technical expertise and objective analysis. Courts usually rely on the record and not the emotion that may be in the room, or not anything that's not already codified or written down in the standards when they determine a matter that comes before them. They're simply looking at what was said and how the connection is made from the evidence that was presented to the determination that was ultimately rendered. I think it's important to remind the commission that a decision isn't official until it's in writing. I am aware that some commissions make a decision on Tuesday night during the hearing, and then staff turns around Wednesday morning and writes it all up and sends it out. There are also jurisdictions that make a decision at one meeting, and then 2 weeks later they have another meeting where the findings and conditions have been prepared based on the discussion and the decision that was rendered 2 weeks prior. It doesn't really matter, but it's not official until it's in writing. So if I'm standing before you and you approve my subdivision request and you have the authority to approve it at this level, I can't go out tomorrow morning and start digging trenches and that sort of thing. It's got to be in writing, and if there's an appeal period to that, the appeal period needs to expire before any rights have been conveyed to me as a property owner based upon a decision from this commission. The decision must outline findings of fact to support the determination. This is really nothing more than a sufficient explanation that connects the evidence that's presented to the criteria. And it really comes in 3 components: the applicable standards as they are enumerated in the code, the evidence presented or not presented that's in the record, and a conclusion explaining whether the criterion was met or not. Another very quick practical example here. I'm making this up, but Section 5.5 6.3L of the zoning ordinance requires that the proposed garage for automobile repair be compatible with surrounding development. Factual statement, right? Evidence presented during the hearing established that the surrounding area contains commercial and mixed-use properties on 3 sides of the subject site, including a gas station to the east, gymnastics instruction facility to the west, and a retail establishment to the south. The 3-acre size of the property is sufficient in size and shape to meet all applicable development requirements for yards, open space, parking, loading, and landscaping, and the applicant has testified that all noise-generating activities will occur inside the building, will occur indoors. Here comes the concluding statement. Based on this evidence, the Planning and Zoning Commission finds that the proposed use is compatible with the surrounding area and the applicable development standards. There's a connection between the evidence and the resulting or the ultimate decision. I also recommend, highly recommend, that the decision, if there is conflicting evidence, that it be also referenced. I think ignoring unfavorable evidence or evidence that is contrary to the decision that's made weakens your decision. So it could include something like this. Although several residents expressed concerns regarding increased traffic congestion, the traffic impact analysis prepared by a licensed traffic engineer concluded that the increase in traffic created by the project would remain within acceptable level of service standards established by the village. The Planning and Zoning Commission assigned substantial weight to the professional traffic analysis submitted with this request because it was based on measurable data and accepted engineering methodologies. You haven't ignored the people that said, I feel like, I may not have evidence, but I know in my gut that traffic is going to be a problem, and weighing that against, again, a study, an official study, an analysis using adopted methodologies. So we've touched on this very briefly. Let's just run through it really quickly. But ex parte is any communication that occurs outside of a public hearing. It involves fewer than all the parties having a legal interest in the matter. It's about a pending or an upcoming matter in front of the commission, and is made to or initiated by a commission member having jurisdiction over the matter. Again, you're acting as judges, so you want to avoid any discussions outside the public hearing. Examples include having communications with people involved or not involved in the subject matter, pending before the hearing body, independent investigations. We talked about site visits just a few minutes ago. Even communications that are made with the best of intentions. I'm just trying to help. My advice is don't be unhelpful, but make sure you qualify that you can't help in that situation because, again, your role is to be a judge. And you want to make sure that there's a very clear delineation between acting as a judge, acting as a hearing officer, acting as a commission member, and quote-unquote helping in a situation. Ex parte includes face-to-face discussions, phone calls, emails, text messages, independent internet research, pictures, site visits. You know, again, things that don't come up during the hearing or outside the public hearing fall into the category of ex parte. Really, the key point is that, as I mentioned earlier, all fact finding should be done during the hearing. It's the applicant's responsibility to communicate to you, to your satisfaction, that their proposal meets the criteria. If you feel that an aerial photograph of the property is important, the applicant is the one that bears the responsibility to do that. And it's absolutely acceptable for this commission to say, Mr. Williams, we need to see an aerial photograph. And you keep talking about how the topography on your lot is much different than surrounding lots. Give me something that I can, roll up my sleeves and look into. I need more than you simply just testifying to the fact. That's absolutely appropriate to come from the commission. Why prohibit ex parte communications? It's not fair. That's in a nutshell. The decision maker can be inaccurately informed, they can be improperly influenced. It only gives one side of the story. If we're having a conversation about my project while we wait for our prescriptions to get filled at Walgreens, right? Even if there's an absence of actual influence or misinformation, other parties may feel that they've been cheated and believe that the process has been tainted, and we don't want to do that. Again, You want to hold on and retain community trust. It's possible for a commission engaged in ex parte communication, particularly if it's of an ongoing or recurring nature, to develop a reputation for being susceptible to improper influence. And again, that diminishes community trust. And the big one, ex parte communications can invalidate the actions of the hearing body. Should an appeal be filed and it gets to the court, or it even gets to the governing body, and the governing body determines that some sort of ex parte communication has taken place, it is not uncommon for courts to say, we're saying you shouldn't have done that, so you get dinged for doing something you shouldn't have done, and then they make you do it all over again. And that essentially is a waste of time, effort, and resources, because you have to do it again because you didn't do it right the first time. I am a baseball fan, not because I'm a retired old man, but I've always liked baseball. But in the last couple of years, I have realized the striking similarities between baseball and planning and zoning. Think about it. Baseball is established on a set of rules. And when it's appropriate, those rules can be changed. Those rules provide predictability. If my good buddy, Mr. Shohei Ohtani, hits a sharp drive to right center field, what's he going to do? You guys know this. He hits the ball, where's he going to run?
First base.
First base. What if he said, well, in Japan, we always run to third base. I've never been taught to run to first base. Does that matter? No. We would say it's the rules of the game. So it provides a level of predictability. There's a large focus on the fans in baseball. I love going to the Isotopes game because it's very family oriented. They want people engaged and having fun. That's part of it. So they remember who their audience is, right? Cheating is condemned. I won't say any more about it to you Astros. And finally, the contest is determined based on the culmination of events. It doesn't matter how many runs are scored, in the first inning. I could score 12 runs, and it doesn't mean that the game is locked up. We wait till we get to the end of the game, and it's a culmination of everything that's occurred. It renders the result as to who won and who didn't. Planning and zoning stuff is very similar. There's a set of established rules that we have to play by. There's a level of predictability that should be part of the process. If it's necessary to modify, to change, or to tweak a rule, there's a process to do that. There's a large focus on the public. Maybe they're fans, maybe they're not. But again, who are we here to serve? It's a public process meant to engage the public, so we need to stay focused on the public. In this P&Z process, much like baseball, cheating is a no-go. You cannot cheat. You have to play by the rules. You can't bend them, you can't tweak them. There is a process. If they're not working, you can go through. But making up your own rules is not allowed in planning and zoning matters. And finally, a decision is based on the culmination of the evidence that's presented to the decision-making body. Here are the rules of the game. All witnesses have to be sworn in, and all testimony has to be provided under oath. You've got to provide an opportunity for cross-examination of witnesses. Ex parte communications must be avoided. All the evidence in the record has to be considered in the decision. And again, as I mentioned earlier, some evidence can carry greater weight than others, but everything that's presented has to be considered. You've got to provide a written decision which outlines the facts that support your determination. And last but not least, all involved or interested parties are entitled to notice. They get a copy of the decision that's made, they get a copy of the announcement about where the hearing will be held, things of that nature. Last time I'll ask this. Questions? Yes, sir.
This is, I think, similar to the question I asked you almost a year ago.
See if you get the same answer, right?
I hope so. So if, as in the example you gave, the commission says we don't have a real sense of what you're saying about the contour of your land, and we need more information, what do we do with the application? Do we hold it over to the next meeting? Is there a technical word for that? Sometimes people have said, well, I need you to decide one way or another. I've got all this money put into it.
Well, you could, I mean, I've heard it referred to as a deferral. We're gonna take item 5G and we're gonna defer it to the August 12th meeting. You could also continue, and again, the distinction is really not important for our purposes today, but you could continue the matter, meaning you're gonna pause it and you're gonna pick up later when it's rescheduled. But if you've got, and I've been there, you've got, you know, give me something to sink my teeth into. Help me help you kind of thing. And you've got people that say, well, I don't know what to do, or I've already been doing this for 3 months and I don't want to spend another $3,000 with my engineer. You've kind of painted yourself in a corner as an applicant. If the commission doesn't have enough information to make a favorable decision, you're left with one choice. Well, really two. You can continue it and ask them to give you that additional information. But if an applicant won't or can't get to you what you need, then I would argue that they're not meeting the criteria. You've still got questions. You're not convinced that that the applicant's argument, you know, meets the criteria for approval. By default, you're denying the request.
So with a denial, they can obviously come back at a later date, but they have to go through the whole, start all over again.
Sure, or they could appeal that denial to the governing body,
Right.
who, again, in my scenario here, in our little scenario here, I would hope the governing body would say, well, the Planning and Zoning Commission asked you, Mr. Williams, to provide a topographic survey, and you said that costs too much money. What's changed? Well, nothing, I just don't want to do it. Well, again, now at the governing body level, we're unable to make a decision because we need this evidence or we need this information as well.
Right. But if you defer or continue, does notice have to be reposted?
Well, it's possible. I mean, it would depend on what your code, your local code requires. Some jurisdiction in your rules of procedure. Some communities require notice all over again, some don't. Sometimes that's an argument that applicants will make to avoid that. If there's a requirement for me to pay for signs and repost them and pay for the legal ad that's going to be run in the newspaper again and pay for mail out. I don't have that kind of money. You know, it's not meant to be punitive in nature. But it's a public process, so we've got to make sure we meet all those public notification requirements, and they come with a cost.
I can answer part of that if allowed. So this has happened a couple of times where something had to come back. As long as during the actual meeting we say this matter will be deferred to a date certain, which is potentially the next meeting. You know, we've asked the applicant, can you have what we need you to have by the next meeting, or should we make it 2 meetings out? Then the presumption is that everyone in the room or on the Zoom who's interested in that matter will hear, oh, now it's going to be heard in September on this date, and then it will show up on that meeting notice and agenda, and that's sufficient. But if it just takes them 6 months, then they're going to pay for certified letters again, and et cetera, et cetera.
And that's a very common approach, is to, you know, it can, there's no hard and fast rule on that other than notice has to be initially provided, but some commissions may choose to not have to renotice or not send mail outs or things of that nature, and some commissions may choose to, you know, may opt to require it.
And I want to clarify the distinction between your 15 days and our 20 days.
Yes. 15 is the legal minimum. If you've got something more than that's okay. It just can't be 14 or fewer days. It's got to be at least 15.
So, Brandon, you think pre-meetings would solve some of these problems?
Oh, good point. Yes, I mean, that's an option that I've seen in communities. Some communities, Albuquerque, for example, for certain requests, require a pre-application meeting.
Yeah, I think we need to look at that.
And that really kind of creates a step in the process that helps you as a commission ensure that people aren't just coming in blind.
Right.
Because not everybody that comes before you has experience in development, land use, subdivision, things of that nature. So if you've got somebody that's relatively new, a local, mom and pop come in and they want to subdivide their property, requiring them to go through a pre-application meeting ensures that staff takes time to explain to them, give them the materials that they need, outlines the criteria, tells them the process. This is step one, this is step two, this is step three.
Yeah.
So it's
And I've been to Albuquerque's and Santa Fe's pre-meetings. They're great. They solve a lot of problems before we end up looking at things.
correct, and that's the benefit, which is
Yes.
Staff is identifying issues that may come up. My earlier example about the fire lane, had that particular developer
Exactly.
gone through a pre-application meeting, perhaps they could have saved some time in their design and their layout. So there are benefits to that, but again, there's not a requirement. It would be something
Right.
that you as a commission or the governing body could push forward.
So can the commission require that? Can we make that ruling, or do we need to go before the council?
Well, you gotta have to make it a requirement. It has to be adopted, codified, and formally adopted through the legislative process to do that.
Okay,
Just requiring it, not specific, if it's not called out in the ordinance, you've got some legal liability in requiring people to do that if the code doesn't specifically state
Yeah.
that they have to do it.
it's definitely a positive thing to do.
Sure,
And-
and I've also seen communities that strongly recommend it. They don't require somebody to go through it, but they will say something along the lines of, all applicants are strongly recommended to meet with the planning and zoning director prior to filing an application so that you understand the process, the steps, the costs, things of that nature.
I do that. I was
Yeah,
going to
but-
say, I do that already. You're talking about having an extra commission meeting, because all applicants do meet with me prior
It's-
to.
Yes, it's a pre-meeting where the commission are present, but we're not making a decision. We're listening to, and the applicants are also present too, to listening to the discussion, and we're taking in that information, and we're not making a decision at a pre-meeting.
And I don't mean to
Am
sound
I
ignorant,
accurate on
but
my
that's
description?
very common. Do you all have a sketch plat process here as it relates to your subdivision application? So essentially, that's what a sketch plat meeting is that it's informal, a decision is not made, but it allows everybody to get in the same room and kind of look at the map or roll out the map and say, this is what I'm proposing, and there may be some suggestions or there may be some cautions that are expressed to an applicant, but it's really just to kind of get everybody familiar in this scenario with a subdivision application, get folks familiar with what's coming, what's going to be coming formally before the commission.
Yeah, but not everything we see goes through a sketch plat, correct? Everything we,
Correct. If it's a summary plat, one lot into two, something like that, I don't require a sketch. But if it's one of those pretty good sized subdivisions, we absolutely do, so that you can see it and, we can thrash out things like fire suppression and et cetera, just something of a large nature.
So, would that change on an administrative standpoint, legal notice and the timing for that? Would we be sending out everything in accordance with the pre-meeting? Or would we still send all legal notice, post 30-day notices, 15-day notices to the actual hearing date? How would that affect?
If I'm understanding, it would depend upon what your rules require. So if you have adopted on the books rules that don't require a second round of notice after the initial, then you wouldn't have to worry, the time periods wouldn't really come into effect. However, if you don't have some exclusion or something that allows you to kind of deviate from the normal process, it may bump when your hearing can be heard because you got to backdate it in order to meet all your public notice requirements. And so, I want to come back in August. I want to come back in August. Well, we don't have enough time to advertise and send notice and do all that sort of thing. The earliest we can get you in would be September, and that's just because the rules are written that way.
Have you ever seen a municipality do a separate notice for pre-meeting hearing? Or however,
A separate notice for a pre-meeting hearing.
well, so like we posted 30-day for this meeting. Has anyone ever posted a 30-day specifically for that if the agenda items are going to be different? That might be a little stretch.
I will say the questions tonight are fun. I don't think so would be my horrible answer to
No,
that.
that's okay. That's a fine answer.
I mean, there would be nothing wrong, let me put it this way. You have to meet the standard. You have to meet the minimum. That if you're going above and beyond, that generally is not an issue. So I'm thinking of a scenario where there's a particular case in Bernalillo County that was controversial, and the planning department decided to send a second notice, even though that was not the practice at the time, but there were, somebody above my pay grade made the decision to say, I know it's gonna cost an extra $200, but we wanna make sure that community members stay informed, so let's send out those letters again, just to remind them that this matter had been deferred until the August hearing or whatever the situation is. So again, there wouldn't be a problem with that. The problem would be if you're required to send notice and you don't send notice.
Okay, thank you.
So can a pre-meeting be set 1 week before planning and zoning meeting?
Well, you'd have to meet the publication deadlines. So depending upon the action, you should have an established calendar that says in order to meet this meeting, whether it's a pre-application meeting or a sketch plat discussion or whatever it might be, you need a hard and fast date for the application to be submitted, the fees to be paid, the legal ad to be run, things of that nature. A week is not going to give you enough time.
It seemed to me it would depend a lot too on if 1% of the cases that come in front of the commission have to have a delay because there was more information you needed, then there's a need for pre-meetings probably low. But if 95% of the time you can't make a decision because of information,
True.
meeting might be more necessary. But when Lori is, when I'm talking to Lori, she does a lot of the nuts and bolts of things to make sure that when things come in, they're in front of the commission in a way that there's low chance of something missing.
Yeah.
And you can see it better than me, go ahead.
Well, I'm trying to think this through in terms of, we have that calendar that's in your packets. And I have there's the date of the meeting, and then we back up, okay, we do a 30-day meeting notice, even though 15 is. So I'm trying to think, okay, if we're automatically going to hear every single thing twice, I have to make sure that all the materials are still in by a certain date. What if there's the pre-meeting here in a public meeting, and the commission asks for something else? Now, how does that jive with, now there's a new notice and there's a new application because there's new information? I'm just trying to puzzle this through. And I will say that when I first started working here, I did notice that there were a lot of things that seemed to be heard over and over, took forever to get anything decided. And I thought, well, how can that be remedied? Well, the way it can be remedied is for you to see it in its entirety the first time you see it. To the best of my ability. If something comes out in a meeting I didn't know about it, then so be it. But if somebody gives me half an application, you're not going to see it unless they insist. That's happened one time. I said, it's your money. You're welcome to bring this half an application and try to convince everyone. But 99.9% of the time, they know everything they need in the application, everything that the code asks for. And I tell them, you need to tell the Planning and Zoning Commission what it is you want to do. Don't change your tune. This is what you're going to do. If you do a little less than that, then so be it. But they need to know what is it you want to do. Here's all your supporting documents that they will need, the commission will need.
So Brennan, in the city of Albuquerque, what's the process for pre-meetings? Is there 30-day notice, or can it be done
I don't remember, to be completely honest. I mean, I know that there are often, or back in the day, there used to be a rush of pre-application meetings as we got closer to application submission deadline. So people would want their pre-meeting so that they could then turn around, you know, identify any issues or any problems, and then turn around and submit their site development plan application the following week, because that's Thursday at close of business, everything must be in order to make the August hearing. But very good points made here. A, is there an operational need? Are you frequently, as a commission, seeing stuff that you feel is incomplete? Maybe we change the process, maybe we create a pre-application, maybe we modify the standards, the application standards. And so we start requiring a topo map to be submitted, or whatever it is that, you know, your common issue that you see overlooked or you feel is pertinent to you making a decision that applicants a lot of times just come up short with.
Yeah, and it may not be every month that we need a pre-meeting.
Correct.
Can I ask a clarifying question? I'm sorry. I feel like there's two separate definitions of pre-meetings going on right now.
Yeah.
I feel like you're talking about a pre-meeting being with staff and the applicant to walk through what's needed. And I feel like what's being conveyed here is about the letter that we got that you weren't privy to about, well, but you were in the room, so you got to hear it, is about the commission meeting with staff and potentially the applicant, just to hear everything that's being presented.
Correct, yeah.
And have the input by staff, but not make a decision. So I just want to make sure that we're being really clear about the two conversations.
I appreciate that, and you're right. I'm the way I'm thinking is it can be done. Both paths are possible. Whether it's a meeting outside of commission involvement that occurs prior to an application being made, and it's simply planning staff. I'm just making it up here. It may include the Public Works Department, and it may include the Fire Department, and they're each checking for respective aspects of this conceptual development proposal, and then Lori's explaining, okay, if you want to get on the August agenda, we need your fees and your materials submitted by such and such a date.
Yeah, I think what Jody just said is, she clarified what I was going for. This meeting where we're all involved, but no decisions are made, the staff presents it to us and the applicant. So we have something to work with prior to the meeting actually coming up. We've had time.
We already have the materials, so I don't understand what this pre-meeting would be about. We have all the materials in our notebooks ahead of time. One of the points that was made is that you should review it ahead of time. You know, we had one meeting where we did not have sufficient quorum and we had to cancel it. People were very angry that they were here. I don't think they're going to be happy to come twice and we say the first time, oh, we just want to know what you're going to say next week, but we're not going to make a decision. So I am against that pre-meeting meeting. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
And particularly if it involves the commission, and I apologize, I was here, I was conscious, I think. I didn't catch all the specifics, but I would question, or let me back up.
I've got the attorney wanting to say something.
Oh.
Hey there. I just wanted to chime in with a little bit of a 2 cents, which is that I think that.
But finish what you're going to
Well, the distinction that I would make is that if you feel the need, and it's a commission decision, but if there's a need to have some sort of a pre-application meeting, you have to make sure that the rules allow you to do that. I would question personally, why would I need to come back twice? So I'm not understanding that need or that distinction. But having people meet with staff, so outside the commission, would avoid notification, publication fees, mail-out fees, legal ad, things of that nature. If it can be resolved at the staff level, I think from an operational standpoint, that is the most efficient way to do it. Now, that may not always work for every type of application, so some sort of determination can be made if it's above 10 acres, or if it pertains to a shopping center site, or whatever the qualifier is that requires some sort of a pre-application meeting in front of the, not pre-application, well, like a sketch plat, some sort of a conceptual. We're not going to make a decision on that. Again, it's got to be, you got to have it in writing. You can't just make that up on the fly. But it might be appropriate for this commission to consider certain qualifiers that would necessitate that. But you don't have to do that. I agree. I think while the public loves government and I love planning and zoning commissions, there gets to you get to a point where you don't want to have to go to another public hearing. I just want a decision rendered on this so that we can either build or try something else, or whatever it is. So you want to make sure that you're not exhausting the public by having so many meetings without rendering a decision. When an application comes in, to some degree it needs to be complete. What that is really depends upon you all and how you do your business.
Corey, can you unmute?
I should be unmuted, hopefully.
She wanted to say something. She wants to say something? Corey. Go ahead.
Can you guys not hear me?
We can.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. So what I wanted to say, and I think we sort of steered away from it, is
our attorney. Go ahead.
We are veering into, I think, to the point of this entire training, into a subject that is not been appropriately noticed, right? We're doing a discussion about procedure, and we're treading into discussions about our actual rules of transacting business. So I would, A, I think we sort of already did, but B, caution that this is the kind of thing, if we want to engage in this discussion in a further detail, we should consider adding it to a future meeting where we can get into the weeds about whether or not this is something we deem necessary here in the village. Or, I mean, even another alternative is, if it's a routine thing that we're finding that applications feel incomplete, then it would behoove us to be requesting more out of our ordinance or application process, and maybe not entertaining changing our rules of procedure. But that's all things sort of just to noodle with outside of this meeting. But again, we're veering into territory that has not been noticed appropriately. So I just wanted to give that word of caution.
And if I could, as chair, I would agree. And I was going to mention that when we get to the item on the agenda called Commissioners Forum, we might want to have a discussion as to whether or not this item would be noticed as part of our agenda for the next meeting or some future meeting. Any further questions for Mr. Williams?
Well, I guess tied into something that you had said earlier, if we feel that ties into all of this. If we feel that sometimes I've come here and I've watched the meetings, many times, and sometimes it feels like a decision, you're under the gun. You have to make a decision right now, and maybe all the different aspects haven't really being considered, or even like you said, judges go to chambers, they get to look at everything and figure it out. So are there other grounds where sometimes, like you said, a pin is put in it, so then it's addressed at the next meeting? Or also, I forget if it was planning and zoning or if it was a council meeting, but if there's a circumstance when legal counsel, there's a situation that comes up, and then it's like, well, what do we do in this kind of situation? What's the ordinance? And if the council says, you know what, I'm not sure in this application, you know what, I think I need to look into that. Isn't that grounds right then to also say, you know what, we need to put a stop to this right now then, and not make a decision on something without really knowing the legalities of it or how it's being interpreted based on the ordinances and that kind of thing?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, again, a lot of these are issue specific, but in your example, if staff or the attorney doesn't know and that answer is critical to making a decision one way or the other, then it's absolutely appropriate to defer, continue, pause, get an answer and then bring it up at a later time. I mean, that may result in somebody, typing something into their computer and giving you an answer 5 minutes later. That may require more research than that, so it has to go to another hearing. But again, making a decision without all of the questions answered or the evidence clarified should be avoided. You want to get, ideally the commission wants to make a decision, one way or the other, based upon the evidence compared against the criteria.
Further questions? Go ahead, Patrick.
Could I make just one more addition? My letter specifically referred not to a pre-application meeting, but my experience with the Environmental Planning Commission was a meeting between the commission and staff the week before the hearing or whatever that time period was, where the issues that were brought up were discussed between staff and the commission and reviewed any questions that they had regarding the ordinance, questions about, it was just kind of a clarification where the commission made no decisions. It was, as I recall, it was a public meeting.
Mr. Chair, I apologize. This is treading back into territory that hasn't been appropriately noticed. We're outside of the public comment period. I hate to do this, but I just don't think that it's appropriate to be addressing members of the public at this time.
So if we decide to further pursue this, you, as a member of the public, we'd want to hear more. Okay, so should we thank our presenter, Mr. Williams?
Yes, thank you.
And
Thank you. Let me thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
it was terrific, thank you. Okay, let's continue with our agenda. And next item, of course, is the election of officers. I want to point out that there may be something that the secretary has to do, and the secretary is no longer with us. I was able to chair because I'm here as chair and Mary is vice chair, but I'd like to open up the meeting for nominations for chair, and then I'll open it up for vice chair and for secretary.
I'd like to nominate Jerry Sturmer for chair.
I would second that wholeheartedly.
All right. There's been a nomination and second. Is there another nomination? If not, we'll call for the vote.
Okay, let me make sure, nomination was made by Commissioner Source and seconded by Commissioner Harrington, correct? Okay, for the vote, for Jerry Sturmer as chair, Salome Ward,
Aye.
Mike Source,
Aye.
Edgar Bowles,
Aye.
Jody Harrington,
Aye.
Mary Chappelle,
Aye.
and Jerry, I guess you get to vote too.
Pass.
Okay.
So thank you for your confidence. I very much appreciate it and will endeavor to do a good job. I think that we've heard a lot tonight about who we serve and who we're about, and that's the members of this community, and that's what I always have in mind, and I hope I'll be able to continue that, working with you. Let me now open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I would nominate Mary Chappelle.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay.
I'm sorry, who seconded? Okay.
Okay, are there further nominations? Seeing none?
Okay, for the vote, for Mary Chappelle as vice chair, Salome Ward,
Aye.
Mike Source,
Aye.
Edgar Bowles,
Aye.
Jody Harrington,
Aye.
Mary Chappelle,
Aye.
and Jerry Sturmer.
Aye. All right, now we would like to nominate someone for secretary.
I would nominate Jody Harrington.
We have a nomination for Jody Harrington,
I'll second.
second by Commissioner Schorsch. Do we have any other nominations? Seeing none?
Before I
Please
call the
call.
vote, I'll let you know, in the rules for transaction of business, it seems to imply that the secretary has to do the minutes. That's incorrect. We do those. But you will sign off on plats that get approved, you and the chair. So for the vote, for Jody Harrington as the secretary, Salome Ward,
Aye.
Mike Source,
Aye.
Edgar Bowles,
Aye.
Jody Harrington,
Can I abstain?
of course, Mary Chappelle,
Aye.
and Jerry Sturmer.
Aye. Okay. Thank you for being officers. And let us go to the planning and zoning report, which we have a written version of, but you may want to highlight some things and add things if you like.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I did have something here to add, which I'll pull out so I don't forget. So for the benefit of the new commissioners, there are certain types of home occupations that I'm allowed to approve. Typically, that's something where you've got a person sitting at a computer in their home, or they're painting, or they're doing something low impact, and have rare to no client visits. So I will always list the ones that happened in the previous month. Sometimes we have 4, sometimes we have 1. So I'll always list those. And then I usually just give you, I noticed when I started working here that someone was saying, I got 1,242 phone calls and 800 people walked in. I'm like, no, we're not doing that. So I try to just pick out some of the highlights of the previous month of things that I worked on. One big thing that I personally do, I'm the floodplain manager also for the village. So drainage issues, stormwater issues are kind of my specialty. So in this case, I met with SCAFCA. There's some projects within the village. The SCAFCA owns some land within the village where they operate retention ponds. And so we collaborate with Public Works mainly, but all of us on how to help us with our drainage problem. We do not have storm sewers in the village, so you'll see things like that occasionally. There's a clean and lean property. If you weren't aware, it's 744 Old Church. I can tell you that as of today, actually maybe yesterday afternoon, the code enforcement officer did get a quote that I think we're going to go with. So we're going to move forward on that hopefully very soon. There's a draft noise ordinance that many of you probably already know about. I just kind of gave you the highlights, but the thing that I wanted to mention, and some of the current commissioners, there were questions about traffic studies actually, and I became aware that NMDOT, it's not really a traffic study per se, it's a speeding study that they're doing right now along Corrales Road. They're collecting data. They were hoping to have a draft report by early July, but we did not have a meeting with them, so it hasn't been presented yet. The final submittal should be later on this summer, early fall. So they're looking at, is speeding a problem on Corrales Road or not? They're also, interestingly enough, looking at what they're calling a 4-way stop control analysis on Corrales Road for 4 intersections, which would be Cabazon Road, Meadowlark Lane, La Entrada, and Sagebrush. So in theory, in the future, there could be 4 4-way stops on Corrales Road. So that's something they're looking at. And so unless you have any questions of me, that's my report for tonight.
I have a couple questions. Okay. The SCAFCA issues, what ponds are they concerned about? Can we get a little more detail on those?
Yeah, one of the ones we talked about is at the bottom of, I want to say Coronado Road. I believe it's at the bottom of Coronado Road. There's a big one at the bottom of Paseo de Corrales.
Right.
And, their concern for the village is we don't have storm sewers, so my department constantly is asking for grading and drainage plans, engineered grading and drainage plans when folks put in new infrastructure. They have to have a pond on their property. And initially, all is well. We have a grading and drainage plan. At that point, we issue a building permit. We ask for a certified as-built from their engineer that this thing was constructed as designed, and that's wonderful. But what about 5 years from now when the thing is silted in or someone else buys the property and says, well, why there's a hole there, I'm going to fill that in. So the ongoing maintenance of the retention ponds was something we talked about. And there are some grants and some other agencies that we're going to reach out to for maybe educational materials, because we are kind of unique. You know, other communities do have storm sewers, and we don't. And how do we keep these retention ponds going? Because ultimately, all of that flow ends up in the Skafka Pond or the village-owned pond, which wasn't designed for it. So it's an ongoing issue.
So the concern, are we able to meet the 100-year event at this point?
The short answer is yes.
Maybe.
But we have historic flows, so
Correct, I understand historic flows.
there's no statutory or ordinance requirement that anyone do anything with historic flows, and that's a problem.
Yeah. Now, redirection of historic flows, we had talked about that and having meetings on redirection, and is that going to happen anytime soon?
All I can tell you from my standpoint is I recently got 3 easements on private properties, and the property owners are allowing us to go in and do work, and we're going to be addressing, at least in those areas, all of the flows, whether it's historic or from a road or whatever. It's almost, I mean, think of the Salsey Basin project, which was huge, and
I
there's
understand, yeah.
you almost have to look at a given area and say, what can we do in this given area? What is the watershed for this particular pond? And then work backwards.
Correct. There was a couple of roads in the village that Skafka is supposed to review and meet with the property owners. Is that coming up anytime soon?
I can't speak to any of their meetings, but I know that we did bring up flows coming down Coronado when I met with them last time.
Right.
So my office is concentrating on the folks on Coronado Road and Merriam Acres, which also flows into it, and sending a letter to all of them and trying to gently coax them into looking at their own properties and how they might be contributing to a problem.
Yeah. So regrading, repaving of village-owned properties, is that something that the village is looking at carefully so they don't overload?
Oh, absolutely.
These ponds?
Absolutely.
Okay, I
Yeah.
think that's part of what this upcoming meeting is supposed to be about. Do we have any idea when that's going to be set?
I can find out for you.
Thank you.
Further questions?
I had a question about what the quote was to do the clean and lean.
Oh, yeah.
All that stuff on
quote?
their property, what the quote was.
Well, we got a quote from a company that will come in and remediate the property, but we don't have a quote yet from Sandoval County Sheriffs to watch over. So I don't have a full quote yet.
But what is it for the?
It was less than $20,000, which shocked me because but they have caveats in there. If they get in there and they find out that some of these materials are asbestos or hazardous, that quote's going to change.
One more question. Rachel Lane, can you give us some updates on that?
Oh, that was one of the 2 roads where I had gotten a total of 3 easements. One of them is where Rachel connects to Vi Vista.
Mm-hmm.
That property owner actually gave us 2 little chunks to work on, and then the property, Rachel Lane is essentially someone's driveway. It's a private driveway, and they gave us another big chunk. So you put it all together,
So
it's going to be a
the
unified
village
design.
owns these properties then, or?
2 property owners, 3 easements.
They're owned by the village or owned by the?
The easement will be still owned by the property owner, but we will have responsibility for it.
Okay, does that violate the anti-donation at all?
No.
Okay. I know the area because I was on P&Z when that subdivision was done.
There's quite the arroyo up there on the other
There's
side.
quite historic flows that run through there.
Yeah, it's bad.
Okay. Now it's time for the Commissioners' Forum. It's also time to close the meeting at 9 o'clock. Shall we take a pass on the forum?
I'm okay with that.
Okay, and then I will entertain entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved.
I move to adjourn.
Okay.
I'll second that.
And we won't even take a vote because it's, I declare it unanimous. Meeting ended, and we'll see.